welcome everyone. I'm so thrilled that we're still able to do this via the magic of Zoom, given the world that we live in. So today I'm going to talk to you a little about the work that we're doing at ATO Design to pull in a range of different methods and approaches into the design space to really take a future-focused approach to some of the challenges that we face and increasingly face in the tax and superannuation system. Before I jump in, I might just tell you a little bit about ATO Design for those of you who aren't familiar. So obviously the Australian Tax Office is the administrator of Australia's tax and superannuation system. We're a reasonably large government delivery agency, so we have about 24,000 staff. And ATO Design is one of the older and more well-established kind of human-centered design capabilities in government. It's been around for about 20 years. It's a very, very mature team. And we have about 60 designers in 5 different sites across Australia. Very recently, we've undertaken kind of a major moment of reflection inward to kind of reimagine our own practice and think about what we need to do to pivot the work that we do and the way that we think to add value to Australian taxpayers. And a big part of that has been thinking more actively about the role that systems thinking plays in design practice and how futures and Foresight's methodologies can play a really important part of the work that designers do in designing things for the here and now. So I'm reasonably new to the ATO, but I get super excited about tax and tax policy. And I thought one of the interesting ways to kick this off to tell a story about tax is really everywhere. And when we're taking a systems perspective on tax policy, I think it's pertinent to recognize kind of the enduring impact and the enduring systemic impact that a lot of tax policy has on social systems, economic systems, and cultural systems, and often in ways that we don't recognize. So back in the 1300s, the UK implemented the poll tax, which was the first population-wide levy on all members of the British and UK community. That was the first time in history that everyone had been taxed rather than landlords solely being taxed and passing that on to their subjects in various ways. And one of the challenges with administering the poll tax is that to date, people hadn't had surnames or last names. And the state had quite a challenge in distinguishing between different individuals in the community, distinguishing between those who had paid tax and who hadn't. And the system that was invented to help the government distinguish between different individuals was a system of last names or of identity. The reason that we have last names today, something that has been so enduring over the course of the past 700 years, is because of a tax system and the necessity of governments to effectively tax and deliver services to citizens. So tax is everywhere. It has these really systemic impacts. And even now, in 2020, we need to recognize that the same is true. So these past lessons in the way that we think about what impact tax policy has are relevant for us today, but they can also help us prepare for the future and imagine what a post-COVID world might look like, and particularly what a post-COVID tax and superannuation system might look like. So it's 2.5 hours out of my day to have this conversation. Me and a range of other colleagues have been quite busy in the past 3 weeks, given that the ATO is really heavily involved in the design and implementation of all of the government stimulus packages and, of course, very recently, JobKeeper. And one of the things that we're very conscious of is that the way that we redesign and reimagine the tax system to deliver on the promise of those policies will have an enduring impact. And we need to think actively about the approaches we take to design so that we are thinking about the broader connections the relationships between the different parts of the tax and super system, and the broader systems within which we operate. So one of the things that we've been doing over the past 9 months at the ATO, as I mentioned, is taking that opportunity to pause and reflect on the design work that we've been doing to date, kind of reimagine our design practice. And one of the ways that we've been talking about that is as what we call systems-led design. That kind of draws on two separate dimensions of systems thinking. So the first is recognizing that a lot of design thinkers, design practitioners, people that have a long history in human-centered design work are often naturally really good systems thinkers. They're aware of and attentive to context. They're very good at zooming out to understand how a design interacts with its broader environment. But a lot of the design work that we'd historically done in the ATO, and I also think this is probably true of design work in other places, tended to still focus on products and services, not kind of pushing design slightly further to think about how we design entire ecosystems, how we design connections, and really actively design connections between the different products, services, and experiences that are part of an ecosystem. And then the second thing that we've been trying to do is look outside the boundary of traditional design practice, and particularly traditional human-centered design, to other areas of practice where there are tools, methods, and approaches that offer a lot of value for the everyday work of designers. So obviously one of those areas is systems thinking. Systems thinking is an area that I'm hugely passionate about, but we've also been pushing the boundary of design at the ATO into a range of other different practice domains. So another one that...
Sorry, could I interrupt for 1 sec? The video, some people are saying that the audio quality is quite poor. Luke, I was wondering if you maybe didn't use the video or just showed it for a sec and took it off. It might help with audio quality. Let's try it, if that's okay.
Is that better for people?
I don't know. So I don't know. Some people are suggesting that they can't hear the audio very well, and I just guess if the slides, if you could pop them up for a second, take them down, it may be affecting the audio quality. I don't know.
All right, I've stopped my video, so hopefully that helps as well.
Let's try it. Sorry about that. Sorry, really sorry to interrupt. Thanks.
No, you're all good. So two of the other areas that we've been pushing into, the first is kind of behavioural insights and behavioural economics. And we now have some practitioners that have a long history in that area as part of our team. But then the other area is kind of futures and foresight thinking, so that we can really start to think actively about how we can use design both to design stuff, but also to think differently about the future, and to push people's existing mindsets, mental models, problem-solving approaches, so that when we are really focused on the here and now of building better tax and superannuation systems, we're not building in redundancy that's going to emerge in 2 or 3 years' time. We're using the wealth of tools and approaches that are part of that futures toolbox so that we can preempt some risks or challenges, or so that we can capitalize on emerging opportunities that might not be on the horizon quite yet, but might be soon to emerge on the horizon. So what I want to do with the next kind of 5 minutes that I have left is talk to you specifically about those two areas. So the work of systems thinking and how we imagine systems thinking can really push the boundaries of design practice. And then the work of foresight and futures and how we really believe that that can also push the standard work of foresight, of design. So everyone loves a Venn diagram, and this is one that we love. So if you imagine that design practice and systems practice or systems thinking, and there'll be many of you on the call who probably use slightly different language for what we might call systems thinking. a lot of people will talk about complexity theory or complexity-based approaches, systems-based approaches, systems practice, systems thinking. My take on that is many of those things share more in common than they exhibit differences. And I think as an organization, when we talk about systems thinking, I think we're grouping a lot of those things together. So what then does systems thinking give to design? And what does design really importantly give to systems thinking? And how can we imagine what that space is in the overlap to open new possibilities and new frontiers in the work that we do as design practitioners? So I think the first dimension of that is design really allows systems practitioners to create action and shift things. So, you know, I think if it's a lot of systems thinkers are often criticized for being very good at painting a big picture of all of the things that are happening. Many of you will have seen different systems maps, causal loop diagrams, ecosystem maps, and a lot of people that invest time in producing those artifacts often stand back from them and think, well, that's great. That's a really lovely, pretty picture. But now what do we do? And design thinking offers a real opportunity to identify what the most important leverage points are in a particular system and use the more classical design toolbox to design interventions around those leverage points. On the flip side, designers often can focus on parts of the system in isolation to the whole. And so systems thinking integrated into a design process or an approach to design really helps designers understand both kind of the whole, where to act, but then also how to act, which leverage points to pull, and how entire interventions can be built around those leverage points to design effective change. But then, of course, the crucial point is, what does that overlap look like then? If we're talking about design and we still call ourselves ATO Design and we still label ourselves as designers, designers doing systems-led design. So as this slide kind of says, design but different. So what are the differences in the way that we are imagining and practicing our design? And we'd like to kind of shape this around 4 kind of headline differences. So designing deeply, designing hopefully, designing disruptively, and designing collaboratively. And I'll just run through each of those really quickly. So when we design deeply, we're really focused on understanding the whole and looking at the wider context of a particular change, really focused on understanding or identifying the root cause of a particular challenge. When we're designing hopefully, and designing hopefully is, you know, really, really important at a time that we find ourselves in, we're looking at a system, and rather than tinkering around the edges, we're really channeling our deeper imagination to envisage what entire new systems could look like, recognizing that all of those need to be designed with attention to the human perspective, the way that people actually experience and move through a tax and superannuation system. When we design disruptively, we're really focused on the reality that changing one thing or 2 things or 5 or 6 behaviors is always going to have a ripple effect, a wider ripple effect. And that's empowering on the one hand, but deeply challenging on the other. And so when we harness that disruption, we need to look at the overlap between design and systems to make that real. And finally, designing collaboratively. So thinking about how we design both at different levels of the system, but also with different stakeholders, connecting to work that others are doing that have the same goals rather than working alone. And the ATO does that all of the time in a lot of the spaces that we work, particularly in superannuation, where we are but one cog in a very, very big system. The way that we've drawn all that together in our work is to push ourselves, and many of you will be familiar with this kind of the traditional double diamond design process. When we kind of came to the point in the journey when we said, okay, well, we're trying to pull systems thinking in, we're trying to pull behavioral insights in, we're trying to be really innovative in our approach to design and building change. What does a approach to design or a design model look like that balances and connects the different areas of practice that we're really passionate about? Thinking about behavior change, innovation, systems thinking, and design. And I'm more than happy to talk about this in more detail in Q&A. And there are some resources that we can point you to that talk a little bit in more detail about the design model and how we're using it. But I think the key takeaway for me here, in terms of the conversation that we're having today, is when you need to design a change in a system, and particularly a transformative, imaginative change, a change that needs to stop and reflect on the entire scaffolding of the system that we're working in, a change like we find ourselves in right now with COVID-19, it's really pertinent that we do understand the system, that we as a group think about how we're drawing the boundary, making the system visible, understanding the shared purpose of the actors in that system, so that when we move on to designing the change, we're in a position to design things that work for the here and now, but also work for the future. And I know Jax is probably pestering me to get off, so I have 2 more slides. Well, Sarah's just given me a 2 minutes. So I want to say 2 more things. The first is one of the things that is incredibly powerful about the kind of the futures and foresight toolbox is this diagram again, which many of you will have seen before, which is the futures cone. And of course, we find ourselves at this moment at an inflection point in history where we're redesigning entire systems, entire tax and super systems, but also societal systems in response to a major crisis. And when we're designing that change, it's very easy for us when we imagine what a current state or a future state system might look like, and when we use the tools of systems thinking to bring that to life, to really focus here in the space of what's probable or what we think might eventuate. But I think one of the things that COVID-19 has taught us is that kind of a very traditional risk management mindset to imagining the future or projecting the future is terrible at predicting what we need to know about the way that systems will inevitably change. And so when we are thinking about the design work that we do, it's really important to pull in these futures methodologies. And the final thing, my favorite friend, Cedric Price, which I'll leave you with, is, I think, a wonderful quote to encapsulate both the way that we're starting to imagine the work that we do as an organization, but also I think the work that designers have to do in reaching beyond what they might be immediately comfortable with into other areas of practice, so that we can more actively focus on how to get to the other side, not just in the design of bridges. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you so much, Luke. So now, if you've got questions, please put it in the chat box. I see a few of you have done that already, and Luke can have a read through the chat questions in there and answer some of them. Thanks.
All right, I'm just having a bit of a look, guys. All right, so I'll answer Sandy's question first, because her question, I think, came through pretty quickly after the call out. So who do we talk to understand the system? So obviously, one of the things that is very important for us as a government agency is engaging with a range of different stakeholders that impact and are affected by particular policies, programs, and initiatives. We're really passionate in our organization and in our part of the organization of being kind of the custodian of the user experience, and that's, you know, all Australians, all Australian businesses are users of the tax and superannuation system. And so a lot of the work that we do is connecting in with people actively who are involved in those capacities in the experience of tax and super, but also organisations that represent their interests and needs. Yeah, so is there a key project that the ATO is currently using the cross-section between design and systems thinking for? So, you know, a bit of a cop-out answer there for Sean is basically all of our projects that we work on as an organisation, we're actually in a really unique position where there's a organisational mandate that any change that is designed or any change that is imagined to the tax and superannuation system needs to be designed in alignment with our system-led design approach. So we actually, one of the roles that we play internally for the organisation is building capability and supporting our colleagues to use an approach that kind of connects the traditional human-centered design work that they're more familiar with the systems thinking work that they're less familiar with, to encourage them to, in the work that they're doing in particular parts of the organisation or particular parts of the system, zoom out. So, you know, work that people will be familiar with right now, where this approach is really live, is the JobKeeper stimulus package, but also the cash flow boost, which was one of the earlier government announcements in relation to COVID-19. But even smaller things that probably aren't as high on the kind of the public visibility at the moment. We do a lot of work internally as well. Obviously, the ATO is a huge organisation. We do a lot of work to support that organisation to function effectively. We've been doing some work with our internal human resources area to reimagine what a learning organisation might look like in the context of the ATO, what kind of learning and development support is important for a contemporary organisation like the ATO. And we've been doing that, again, really pushing that part of the office, but also pushing ourselves to think, if we were to take seriously the kind of the mantle of a learning organisation, how would that focus our attention on the broader systems which enable and are impacted by learning? Okay, I'm a terrible multitasker, so I'm going to answer and then read, and great question from Caitlin, because again, it's something that I think we don't have the answer for quite yet, but it's part of the journey that we're going on. And the question is, how do you register or document systems issues that are uncovered when you're designing or working on one particular design issue? How do you make sure what you're learning when exploring one specific thing feeds into your understanding of the wider system? So Caitlin, you'll appreciate that my boss is now on the call and listening in. So this is probably a good one for us to acknowledge that we don't have the answer for yet, but we are putting in place a range of different kind of procedures and systems and structures that help us do that. So the way that we structure our work as an organisation, or the way that ATO Design structures our work as an organisation, is we break our work into different, what we call domains. So superannuation is one domain, individuals is another, small business, so on and so forth. And design projects are run out of those individual domains, but obviously they're parts of an overlapping whole. And a big part of the work of making these connections is really human work. It's of having conversations and building relationships so that designers are able to actively and proactively make connections when they're doing an engagement. But then we're also looking to support that with system solutions. So for those of you that are familiar with kind of the systems world, one of the system mapping tools that's quite popular is an online tool called Kumu. We've been using Kumu as a solution to actually map the connections between all of our work so that we can see what designers have worked on, which internal clients they've been connected to, kind of what outcomes, what strategic objectives, and it's a big systems map of its own. That's an incredible artifact to kind of capture our impact, but it's also a really important tool for us to be able to kind of dive in and say, oh, well, I've got a new project on this. Who else has done something similar? What have they learned? Who else do I need to talk to? And we're a big organization and no one has visibility of everything. So tools like that are really crucial. And then the final thing that I'll say is we're also looking at building kind of a central, I guess, repository or library of system insights that's part of kind of the next step in our system-led design journey, where people can store and retrieve different kinds of information that kind of paint a picture of different parts of the system. So whether that's kind of user interviews, whether that's artifacts or reports or evidence, whether that's actually raw data, kind of imagining what a system looks like when people can say, well, actually, I'm really curious to see what we know about the system issues in single touch payroll, in kind of the individual's tax space. Let me click on that and people will be able to keep kind of like a running commentary of what different system issues and system solutions look like there.